Hi, welcome to Museum Live. I'm Marilyn Thompson, the marketing director here at the History Museum. And we are in the beautiful Oliver Mansion, Kopsche home as the family named it. And I am very fortunate to be sitting here with WSBT anchor Bob Montgomery. Good morning and welcome.
Hello, Marilyn. It's always great to see you.
Thank you, and so good to see you.
And I've seen you many times.
Well, it's nice to have you here. You know, we all experience history in a lot of different ways. Through your eyes, you have seen and you report on history as part of your daily job. You give us the news every day about what's going on in our community. But there's one particular day that we all have memories of, and it happened 20 years ago. And I was wondering if you could share a bit about what it was like for you to be on the air and trying to give information to your community about a very devastating event.
Yeah, September 11th, of course, 2001. And it's interesting that you mention history and the aspect that it has to my profession of journalism. We have a big sign in our newsroom that says, journalism is the first rough draft of history. This is the first written account of what happened that day. Now, as we get more information, sometimes, as with any rough draft, it gets worked over several times over until you get the most accurate and complete story you can. So going back to September 11th, I was on the air with a guy you know pretty well, JT, and we were on WSBT radio at the time. And we got the first notification that something had happened in New York City at the World Trade Center towers. And our computer system at the time just came up with an orange button that would tell you that there's a news alert that's coming in from the Associated Press. And so I saw it, and I was actually doing a newscast at the time, and I popped it up as I was reading something, and I'd mentioned that a plane of some sort, possibly a Cessna, had hit one of the towers. And that was the extent of it. So I mentioned that, wrapped up my report, told JT, I'm going to go back to the newsroom, see what's going on, see if I can get more information, and I'll be right back to give us whatever else information we had. So I go back to the newsroom. At that point in time, we then learned in the next 5-10 minutes or so that it was not a Cessna. You have to remember, by the time that it filtered into the Associated Press and it was getting out that way, that several minutes had already passed. So it wasn't like the plane had just hit and within seconds we had heard about it. The first plane had hit, and so by the time I got back to the newsroom, I was watching the national coverage as it was playing out live, and the second plane hit, and I was watching the screen as the second plane hit. So I immediately got back to the booth, and I told JT, I said, we need to break in and we need to go. And that's what we did. And we were on the air, I would say, nonstop for about 4 hours or so. And this was at the end of the 3-hour morning show at the time. And so we were on the air as information was coming in, and obviously the first report of it being a Cessna turned out to be false, but the original reporting was from the people in the building. They thought that a Cessna would hit it, because no one would assume that an airliner would hit and secondarily would hit intentionally. So as we were reporting this, it went from, oh, that's a horrible accident, to this is something much more significant. And so as we're reporting on this, we are also then getting in reports of other aircraft possibly being hijacked and other targets potentially being hit or at least targeted. One of them being, at one point in time, the State Department. There was a report that the State Department was hit. Turned out that was the Pentagon. We had another report that there was another plane that was potentially heading for the White House, and that turned out to be Shanksville, Flight 93, that ended up being driven into the ground by those passengers. And it was just amazing to see that play out in front of you, and then have to, in a radio sense, have to describe what was happening to everyone, because we didn't have the pictures, obviously, to show people. But then to also see all of our team come together on the journalism side of it and decide, what are we going to do next? How are we going to relay the information that's important to us locally? Obviously, everyone's paying attention to what's happening nationally. And the networks were doing a great job with that, but we still had an obligation to talk about what was happening locally, because the airports were shut down, and there were people at the South Bend International Airport at the time, probably the South Bend Regional Airport at the time, or maybe even Michiana Regional. But we sent some people out there to get an idea of okay, you're stranded now, traveler. What are you going to do if you were in the process of making your way back home? If you were local, you just turn around and go back home. But not everyone who is flying out of the airport is from this area. So how are you going to work that out? Rental cars are being picked up at a very fast pace, and those were leaving. The price of gas, if you remember, the price of gas in some cases skyrocketed just that day, just that fast. And so we were talking about that because people were lining up to buy gas, which happens oftentimes in natural disasters, but in sometimes man-made disasters as well. So all of these things were spinning as we were in the process of determining what we were going to do, and the next thing you know, the networks take over, and they were on the air for 24 hours straight. But we were still having those opportunities to do these cut-in reports, and it was just amazing to see all of this play out. And my memories are crystal clear, vivid. I can remember each person, where they were, what they were doing, what they did along the process. But I think the thing that stands out to me most is not just the acts of what happened that day. There are two things that stand out most. The visual image of President Bush in that classroom in Florida,
yes,
sitting there as Andy Card, the chief of staff, is telling him, and his facial expression changing from to glum, just like that, knowing what had just happened. And the secondary issue is the day after, the September 12th, and how all of the political divisions that were floating around the country stopped. Everything left, melted away. And for that day, we were all in the same battle together. And I remember those things as vividly as it happened yesterday.
I know that we all have the memories, but I think of you as a journalist and having to report this devastating, unknown day. And I know in my head what was going on was, where is my family? Is my family safe? You had to be thinking those things too, and yet you have to just plow through and as journalists do, just report. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is a day.
It is a day.
Will live forever. Many of the news stories, and as you say, the history that happens every day is horrid. Thankfully, some of the news stories that you can report are a little bit more gentle, and even your own personal stories I'm hearing are somewhat gentle sometimes. I remembered many years ago you shared a story about one of your daughters coming into this beautiful setting, and I wonder if you'll share that with her.
Yeah, so Catherine, my now 15-year-old, who was in third grade at the time, she's my resident history geek. She loves history like I do. And so she had to do a school project. And she was always interested in this long before this project came along. And she loved coming to this home. She loved going to the Studebaker Mansion just to see how that was. And so we had an opportunity to come in and get a tour. And we went through the tour, and she got the booklet. In fact, you were kind enough to give her the little booklet of the Oliver family. And so she turned that into her project. It could have been about anything, so she decided to write about the Oliver family. And she got up in front of, she's third grade, she got up with no notes after having read this book probably 5 or 6 times. She wrote out her presentation and she gave it to the teacher, but when she got up to give her presentation, she had no notes. And she went for like 15 minutes. She was supposed to go for 3 minutes. She went for like 15 minutes talking about the Oliver family and what they did and this building and how the eyes follow you, because that was the thing she was most impressed by or scared of. As she looks at the various portraits here, the eyes were following me. They were following me. I said, yeah, they're probably haunted. I'm kidding.
No.
I'm kidding. But it was fascinating how she was able to internalize all that and spit at the third grade and to spit all that back out accurately, but just off the top of her head, and that's how much this made an impact on her.
And that is great. And we do have a lot of school groups who come through the mansion, and we know that they ask the best questions. They are interested. They do enjoy seeing not just the beauty of the home, but to learn about the family. And I'm always amazed and impressed. One thing that we had to do last year because of the pandemic was scramble to find ways that we could reach out to our community at a time when they couldn't come here. So we began offering virtual tours, and especially to classrooms, so that they could, in their own school environment, actually come through the house. And we have curators who will walk through the house talking to the classroom. The kids can ask questions, the curators can answer back. It's a marvelous experience for schools, and so we're delighted. But that is a wonderful story that I love to think about, that one little girl, that sweet little girl of yours, who came through this house and was so impressed at such a young age, and it touched her so deeply that she told that story. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity as well in giving her the book, because she really internalized it. She read it many times. Even after that, she read the book several more times. She just is really fascinated by the whole aspect of history. And when we would go to Washington, we have some family members who live in Washington. We'd go by D.C. and she would have to see this, that, or the other. Then she would be, in essence, our tour guide. She would say, well, this building is this, and this is what happened here, and this is the spot in the Capitol Rotunda that if you put your head down, you can hear what's happening on the other side. It's really fascinating, and I love to see my little history geek out.
And you've done a fine job of already sharing this, but I do want to ask you the question before we have to say goodbye. Why do you think history museums are important to a community?
Well, because it gives you an opportunity to step back in time. Where else in this area can you step into a house like this it has the furniture and the woodwork and everything is beautifully restored, and see how the folks then lived, and the impact that these people made on our community? Because in reality, if it wasn't for the Oliver family or the Studebaker family, there's a pretty good chance our community today would not be the way it is today. Same thing, obviously, with the University of Notre Dame and the impact it's had. But you could also make an argument that one fed off the other, that these families were able to impact the University of Notre Dame and vice versa, that built this community into what it is. Because I'm telling you right now, this is my own personal opinion, if those entities, this family, that family, the university didn't exist, this community would not be a half of what it is today. And I firmly believe that. And I think because of that, we need to honor the people and the families and the entities that built this community the way it is, and to come in and have the opportunity to see these things firsthand. You can't touch, obviously, but you can see them with your eyes, and you can take in the senses, and you can capture the scale of it all. I think it's priceless. It's a treasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow. Thank you all for being with us and listening in on the conversation that I had with WSBT anchor Bob Montgomery. Bob, so good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.